Good morning. It's always nice to be in a room where I don't have to explain what the heck an MPO is. So thank you. My name is Bill Carews, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Really appreciate all being here this morning on a rainy, dreary day in DC, and thanks to those that are joining us virtually. We really appreciate it. Welcome to Insights from Local and Regional Infrastructure Leaders. It's a timely discussion on turning the historic investments of the bipartisan infrastructure law or Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into meaningful and impactful projects. We're delighted to have such a distinguished panel with us here today. Our panel features local and regional leaders that are instrumental in delivering these historic investments and turning them into the meaningful and impactful projects that we're seeing occur across the country. The IIJA provided a historic amount of funding directly to local and regional leaders and governments. And that, in our mind, reinforced the need and the importance of providing the local voice in the investment decision-making process. And we're excited to further strengthen that in the next reauthorization. We're halfway through the life of the bill, and throughout the morning, we'll hear about some of the opportunities and challenges along with the innovative solutions, and hear from our panelists on how these historic investments are impacting our communities across the country. In addition to our panel, we are also fortunate to have Samantha Silverberg from the White House, the Deputy Assistant to the President for Infrastructure Implementation. It goes without saying that implementing such a massive program requires leadership at all levels. And we look forward to hearing from Sam on how the White House is leading on implementation. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our partner organizations, the Brookings Institution, the National Association of Counties, the National Association of Regional Councils, and the National League of Cities for making this event possible. I'd also like to thank Ross and Infrastructure Week for elevating these important issues across the country throughout all of this week. And of course, again, thank you to you for being in the room and for joining us virtually. I think that's a testament to the importance of the local and regional leadership in infrastructure investment and delivery. And now, without further ado, I will turn it over to today's moderator, Dee Tomer, Senior Fellow at Brookings Metro, to introduce our first panel. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you?
Let's separate us.
All right, you agree?
Okay, we probably need to use the mics, right?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Morning. Good morning. I'm not on. Thanks, Ross. Never stop working, Ross. Great. Okay. First of all, for those who are streaming online too, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. You're not as brave as all these people in the room. So for those who aren't in Washington, D.C., or even those who are, and you know who you are if you're a little lazy at home, the weather's horrible. Metro, which is a wonderful transit system, was not working great this morning, especially if you're on the Green Line. So for everyone who made it here, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for enjoying the breakfast, which in case you're in D.C., there's still time to get here. So you open seats, although it's mostly a packed house. So again, thank you for everyone for being here. I'm just going to take a minute before I introduce our panelists here, just to give us some context for the not just today, but really the week, right? So it's quote unquote Infrastructure Week, led by our amazing partners at United for Infrastructure and Accelerator for America. And this has really become quite a tradition. We're over a decade now, and it's just a great time in DC to have people come together, and not just in DC, across the country, and talk about infrastructure issues. In particular, what I've noticed too, and the Brookings Institution has actually been part of this from the very beginning, is that as more and more of these weeks happen, not only we pass some major legislation, I think the major actors here involved in it, particularly the associations, can claim a ton of credit for doing some incredible work. But it's also kind of opened people's eyes to how infrastructure actually gets to ground. that it's not just about federal bills. And frankly, it's not just about our state's departments of transportation and various environmental quality and other associated named agencies are always different. It's always DOT, but it's not always an EPA, right? At the state level. But it's actually our local governments and our local, in the sense of metropolitan, regional governments that are doing tons of the heavy lifting. And as more and more of our conversations are geared towards actually, how do communities come together to decide on projects? Well, that often actually happens at a local and regional. And that's opened a different tenor to the conversation in DC. And again, with my Brookings hat on, I want to say this, like probably in a different way than we've been ready to talk about since the late 1980s and early 1990s, when we saw a major change in how metropolitan areas in particular were handled in federal legislation. So we have a big moment ahead of us. In addition to that, and this is the title slide you'll see sit in a second for the rest of the time, but we've also seen a huge push on data to make it easier to understand where these investments are. We're actually fortunate to have multiple colleagues from the White House here today, so a huge thank you to them for making maps like what's on invest.gov. That is a plug. I hope I get credit for that with someone. Yeah, thank you. They tell you stories, right? Is the word stories on that website. Look, that website is awesome. And we have told the team privately, and we say it publicly. I'm proving it again here today. I really mean this. It is truly unique in the almost 20 years I've been doing this to be able to download that much project data with that much detail to know what's happening in your community. I mean, you all know this too, right? You would talk to actual state and local leaders, and they didn't know where projects were going. I mean, so this is an actual fundamental change, and it is not easy to do, and it continues to need more work. And so the White House is doing big lifting here, not just by putting that data out, by proving the case to continue to invest in federal data infrastructure. To plug ourselves, the Brookings Federal Infrastructure Hub just got updated last Friday. My colleague Ben Swedberg is here, who did a ton of work on that, as well as my colleague Alec Friedoff and Caroline George in the background. This is a great place to go to particularly see how some of that data plays out at a local level to allow you to kind of filter through some of the programs. So again, the White House allows actually innovation. Yes, that's right. Brookings is innovating. I'm allowed to say that for ourselves on the ground for users. And then we've also seen through the law different ways to push localities to get access to information. So this is just one to feature, and thank you both to NLC and NACO and NARC, right? We're in your building for hosting us. But NLC with their partners in the local infrastructure hub, and this is just one example. I'm probably not leaving this on long enough for someone to use the QR code, but it's there. Maybe on the stream, someone will be able to grab it. But the point being that there are tons of different projects and ways to learn on how to apply. And then if you win, what to do with the money too. So with that out of the way, I want to jump into the panel that we have here. And we are really fortunate to not just elected leaders, but actually national leaders for their stakeholders at the table with on the stage with each of us. So without further ado, Commissioner Eileen Higgins from Miami-Dade County. She served in that role since 2018 after many years in public service, including here in Washington, D.C., I think, right? Or at least representing the federal government. She also chairs the National Association of Counties, or NACO's Transportation Policy Steering Committee. And she's an engineer by training, I think I learned for this panel. Yeah. Yeah, so you can fix the bridges for us. And then Mayor Steve Patterson.
I brought a screwdriver.
Yeah. Mayor Steve Patterson of Athens, Ohio, where he's also previously served on the city council. And he was also, and for our Brookings hearts, this makes us go a flutter, was also a longtime professor at OU too. So there's nothing wrong with academics that, can't help solve certain problems. Okay, so here's where I want to go. We're going to turn over to you. It's been a big sea change, right? We have, with the last slide talking about the infrastructure hub, we are the local infrastructure hub. There's multiple now. There are different ways to access federal dollars. Huge demand across the country, and this money is filtering out. So what I'd love to do, and Mayor, I'd actually like to start with you so we can hear first from smaller communities. Too often in DC, we hear from the big communities first, no offense. How not only are these dollars impacting you all on the ground, but particularly with your National League of Cities hat on, how are you hearing from your other members across the country that they're grappling with this? So both in Athens and a national perspective.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me here. To your question, and I'm going to kind of flip this just a little bit. One of the things that's really interesting to think about, and that being that with the localizing and regionalizing the funding of the Bills Act now, where it used to go, as we all were well aware, to 52 state organizations for that funding, and then things get built out and they're taking the lead on major infrastructure projects, to where now we're seeing 23,000, get your head wrapped around that, 23,000 cities, counties, and regional players that are now being able to bring these projects in locally with the direct funding that they're receiving. And Athens, to your question, has been a direct recipient of that. I'm going to share two separate funding streams that have come into the city of Athens. One that was really critical when it came to having multimodal access to a school in the city of Athens. Way back in the day, this is going decades back, the Athens City School District decided to build a new school campus for K through 12. Actually, it was K through 8, and it was built kind of on the fringe of the city, but it was built on a state route that is State Route 56 in Ohio. And it's on the edge. There's no walkable way to get there. So all of a sudden they've created a non-walkable school where the school buses or moms and dads were having to constantly take their kids there and pick them back up, which if you think about that from an environmental standpoint for carbon emissions, it's kind of crazy, right? Especially in this day and age. So we had thought about this for an awful long time. How will we correct this problem? In the meantime, we had a successful housing project come in, and it's affordable, it's workforce housing that went in. It's 192 units that are right on 56 as well, but about a mile away from where the school is. And it's 192 units, and they're 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So you start building 1, 2, 2 and 3 bedroom units. We're talking families that are moving into this housing project. And again, with no way in which those individuals who live there, who have children, to be able to get to the school. So we've been very successful in the past when it came to Safe Routes for All, or Safe Routes to School, the former program, to getting projects in. So we did apply for a Safe Streets for All grant for implementation, and we weren't successful, but we were strongly encouraged to go after a planning. So we went after a planning grant, $200,000 to go through the planning. I think that we have a whole lot of information that we already had before with our previous planning, to where it's going to be hopefully kind of plug and play. But I think that's going to lead to a successful, second round for us to go after implementation to create a multimodal path that goes finally to that school. So a big win there, in my opinion. The other, which is kind of goes back to the 23,000 cities, counties, and regional players. I went to an NLC meeting. It was, I can't remember whether it was City Summit or if it was at the Congressional City Conference here in DC. But when I had learned about the local infrastructure hub boot camp, which is free, by the way.
Sounds so much fun. Yeah, boot camp just sounds like a blast.
Yeah. It's not a cardio boot camp. This is a real instrumental boot camp to train smaller cities and villages to where, and these are cities and villages that may not have the expertise, possibly the personnel capacity, or sometimes it's just the fear of applying for federal funding. And what do I have to do when it comes to the accounting of the project? What if I mess up and there's a clawback provision that I'm going to have to sit there and worry about? So, as I typically do, I came back from NLC conference, wherever it was, and the first door that I see is my deputy service safety director's office. And I said, bam, you're it. You're going to go through the boot camp. Successfully went through the boot camp, came out the other end with an amazing grant through the charging and fueling infrastructure, which had multiple communities within Athens County, within our own backyard, people that we knew, mayors and city managers, village managers, said, jump in this with us. Sure. If you're going to be the lead, we'll do that. And then we started to make it grow to where it became, through our LDD, Buckeye Hills Regional Council, thinking, let's go beyond Athens County and think about counties surrounding us. Now, bear in mind, I may not have shared this. Athens is in the heart of Appalachian, Ohio. We're basically in the heart of the Appalachian region. And you would find Athens to be one of the largest populations, and we've got about 30,000. But we're a city that is just constantly hitting above our weight. We just do. We are fortunate to have Ohio University as one of our major partners. So we grew this, but that wasn't good enough. We started thinking, you know, we'd like to bring in all the players that we possibly can. We knew that in our region, NEVI is kind of a wish at this point in time to have charging stations because we don't have an interstate highway that goes through Southern Ohio, at least east-west, we don't. So we decided, let's work with our community choice electric aggregation, and that is Sustainable Ohio Public Energy Council, who had connections on the western side of the state, all the way to Dayton, Ohio. At that point, we put together a package that included 19 municipalities, and it's going to produce, it would produce in the future, over 250 charging points with 50 charging stations, and this is charging stations that are going to go to villages. And you think about this, villages of 600 people, this is a pipe dream for them, to be able to have a charging station in our community. That's a wish list. That's one of those like maybe someday, but not now because I've got other priorities. So we were awarded $12.5 million for those communities I just mentioned to you, which is going to be a true game changer when it comes to alleviating charging anxiety in Southern Ohio, where it's a lot of older state routes across the southern region.
It's excellent. And you can, why I love the personal stories, and we'll turn to you, Commissioner, is it makes it real for folks, right? This is how dollars actually hit the ground, not just in your specific communities, but these stories abound. We heard both the smaller community, the ARC perspective, and frankly, though, for municipalities at truly city level, let's talk about the municipal approach from a county scale. What's happening in Miami-Dade? What have you all been able to access? And what are you hearing with your NACO hat on of what this moment means to the members across the country?
Well, I chair the National Association of Counties Transportation Steering Committee, and at our national meetings, some of our committees have a little conflict. We no longer have that. We, my committee is the easiest committee to chair because the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law was the promise we were all waiting for, right? We have an infrastructure crisis in this country, and the IIJA is going to give us the opportunity to repair what we have and build what we need, right? Because some of us have, we're a younger community than many, but we have 3 bridges that are over 100 years old, right? Those are probably each one of them, and they're not huge bridges, but they're each probably $100 million replacement. We're growing very rapidly. We're counting about 3 million people. We have 34 municipalities. Half the people in our county don't live in a city. We are their city, right? So we pick up their garbage. We're their police department. We're their fire department. But everybody in our county, whether they live in unincorporated or they live in a municipality, they don't care which government is in charge of which street, which bridge, which infrastructure. They don't know, oh, that's a county bridge, that's a state bridge, that's a city bridge. They don't know, they don't care, they want it to work. And I think what USDOT in particular has done with this bipartisan infrastructure law is allowed us to collaborate, right? You collaborated on the CFI, and we collaborated on the Safe Streets for All. So in our case, the county is big, right? We're the biggest government. And so we have the most capabilities, but we also know that some of our most dangerous intersections where people are likely to be killed happen to be in our municipalities. So do we want to compete and have all of our municipalities submit to USDOT a grant, which by the way drives them insane, right? Because they got to, they have to evaluate 3, 4, 5 applications instead of 1. And so we don't feel bad that you were rejected in year 1. We were rejected too. So they're equal opportunity rejectors of grants.
Called oversubscription, actually, is the term we like.
Subscription. Anyway, my feelings were hurt. But we actually didn't apply for very much money in the first year. And in our second year, we applied for 4 times as much money, but we included our municipalities in that grant. And so we did receive it. And I think that collaboration is really, really important. I also just want to make it clear that we have never really, between counties and cities, I don't know what the total, I mean, I know what we do. Counties operate almost 50% of the roads in this country and more than a third of the bridges. And I guess if we throw in the cities, well, heck, we pretty much, in the 90+ percentile. And we have never had direct funding to help us maintain the nation's critical infrastructure, right? Because most of that funding has gone through formula funds up to the states, which is great. They do a wonderful job. We have great partnerships, particularly, at least our county with Florida Department of Transportation. But they prioritize their stuff, right? I would too if I were them, right? I mean, that's by the way, in the county, I prioritize my stuff. So, but I run more roads than they do in Miami-Dade County, and we've never had the ability to do that. We counties in Florida tend to run all the public transportation systems. And, having to go through the state to have all of this trickle down, one, it takes longer. It adds another level of bureaucracy. And depending on where you live, these decisions are politicized. And in order to get residents moving through public transportation, which is our greener opportunities you were talking about, whether we're talking about biking, cycling, safe walking, dedicated bus lane, in our case, commuter rail and other things, we have got to be moving people out of single occupancy vehicles and into greener modes of transportation. And that is often the responsibility in my county. The county runs, we are the sort of transportation authority. We run all public transportation. But that has allowed city transit agencies to go over for these things. So, for example, in Chicago, they finally got the funding they needed to expand the Red Line, a big equity project to South Chicago, where you've had Black communities left behind. We will have the opportunity through reconnecting communities to build out our North Corridor, which, every one of you lives in a small town, big town, doesn't make any difference. Our country had some pretty racist infrastructure strategies. I-95 could have gone somewhere else. We actually had another spot. Drove it right through Overtown, thriving Black community, small businesses, middle-class folks, tore it down. Everybody that had the resources to move did, left behind abject poverty and a highway. And then the folks that used to walk to work from that neighborhood to downtown are now an hour and a half away with no access to public transportation. And so I actually think this focus on reconnecting community, which is not about the structure of the neighborhood, it's where are the people who have been displaced by this and how do we connect them to the jobs, to the education, to the healthcare, and quite frankly, and it is Miami, to the fun things that they deserve to do without being stuck in traffic. It's a joy to see our federal partners really helping out with this.
Yeah. So I want to get, we have a few minutes left, and I'm really excited that you all got a chance to introduce yourselves, your communities, the great capabilities and multiple programs that you mentioned, particularly focusing on transportation today that filtered in. I want to get down to a couple like tense items though. You mentioned collaboration, you mentioned the state. Both of you sit in red states. I'm comfortably saying this. You don't even need to make facial responses. Very different kind of politics being played out in your state capitals, but still red states by federal election standards and who's in the governor's mansions. How are those relationships playing out when it comes to this law? Are you, and you can bundle in the IRA here if you really want to, but I'd rather stay in the IIJA. Number one, Commissioner, you mentioned collaboration. Are you all finding collaborative attitudes from your state partners? And then second is, look, we know the formulas were topped up just as much as the competitive grant programs were effectively. And you mentioned it, direct money. Is that something that would make life easier for you all if you could each, if you will, both state and local, have more of a direct relationship with the federal government? So that's two questions, right? Are you collaborating well internally? And do you need a different pipeline to to federal Washington? Let me maybe start with you, Commissioner.
Well, Florida is a mixed blessing and a blended family. But so there's two FDOT, there's two states, right? There's the long-term state employees that work on long projects, right? And they work with our department, they work with our engineers and our transportation planners. And so those relationships are wonderful. Like our district secretary, I can call her and text her and it's back. So at this local level, but once you get to the state capitol, these decisions are politically made. I mean, some of the formula funds have to come to us based on population. So that's all good. And we're able to repair more roads and bridges and whatnot. But sometimes these decisions are made politically, like NEVI. It's 5-year money, right? So the idea is all of the charging stations will roll out on the national highway system eventually. Well, Miami-Dade County didn't get in the year 1 plan. So we're the biggest county in Florida and our roads aren't going to have charging stations. So
this is a state decision, you're saying?
State decision. And obviously USDOT reviewed the plan, which includes our roads, but for the plan, I don't think took into account what's the strategy for doing this. And I'm not super mad for year 1, but I'll be real mad if I don't get any in year 2. But the other thing that, for example, the carbon reduction funding, $400 million was offered. And of course, our governor rejected that $400 million. And in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's no regulations around what happens to that $400 million. Does it just go away? Does it come back to the state of Florida? And I'll give you an example. I recommended in the president's budget for our commuter rail line. Thank you very much to FTA. It's a great project. It's an equity project. We've got 2 stations in Little Haiti. Again, those folks don't have access to transportation. The federal share, that's going to be about $454 million. Obviously, public transportation are by their nature environmental projects and carbon reduction. So our governor rejected $400 million. We could have just taken that and then FTA would only have to rustle up $54 million, and they've already agreed to what they're going to pay. I mean, I'm not begging for this money. So those are the kinds of things you've got to wrestle with. And I know there are other folks that have rejected money. And so hopefully there'll just be some thoughts about what do you do when a state decides to reject money when the reauthorization happens. See, I said when the reauthorization happens. See, I'm channeling.
Fair and optimistic. Mayor, same question to you, both in-state relationships and or speaking about what you would like to see out of federal Washington.
Yeah, fair question. Starting with the state, it's interesting. I've been mayor since 2016. So I've been mayor through now my 2nd state administration. And there were certainly challenges when I became mayor, but in full disclosure, the Governor DeWine administration has really been open to partnering, regardless of whatever your political affiliation is, knowing that, at the end of the day, everyone is a constituent of the governor, right? And the other thing that's been advantageous for Athens, as I had mentioned earlier, is that Athens is an Appalachian county. So we have access to Appalachian Regional Commission sources of funding as well. And the governor decades ago stood up a governor's office of Appalachia with Director John Kerry. John Kerry is the current director. John was a mayor of a city that's about 25 miles away from Athens, Wellston. And so John Kerry understands and gets it at the municipal level. I'm also the president of what's called the Mayor's Partnership for Progress, which is a group of mayors, city managers, village managers for 19 Appalachian counties. So we're talking 120 municipalities. And I'm going to be honest with you, most of us don't have a clue as to what the other's political affiliation is, because at the end of the day, our job as mayors and city and village managers, I've got to get those potholes filled. I've got to get those water lines repaired, and I've got to get the sewer flowing, which all those, by the way, don't have an RD or an I next to them. So it doesn't matter what I have to get done. So that's been helpful as well, to where it's truly a bipartisan effort. The CFI grant that we received, Again, some I know what their political affiliation is, others, majority I don't of the other municipalities, nor do I care. Why would I care? I'm in it to help float all the boats for an effort that, again, we would typically never experience, or in the past, you know, that was one of these pipe dream things to have charging and fueling infrastructure coming into our communities. So to have a relationship with, you know, co-chair Gail Manchin has been helpful in being able to, you know, strike the proper chord with ARC. But again, you know, just showing up time after time after time with the same non-divisive conversations moving forward with my state representatives, state senators, with the governor's office. And so I think that's what's key here, is making sure you don't ever burn any relationship, don't ever burn any line of communication, whether it's state or federal, which I've been very intentional in doing. And I think a lot of my counterparts have been doing that as well. And it's you know, it bears fruit.
It's to be so nice. And yes, and I actually mean that as a compliment. And many of us are old enough to remember, speaking of burning bridges, of, you know, right now Florida would love to extend passenger rail from Orlando to Tampa. That line should already be built. And that was about scoring political points. We've seen a very different attitude recently. And it's actually, it's why it's good to have you up here, Commissioner, to speak about. This is still happening, sometimes not necessarily on the front pages like that was at the time. Also in Ohio, that money was also returned, maybe smartly there for the quality of the project. I want to ask one more question, then we'll return to our keynoter. And I want to kind of rope two things together. I already kind of asked about federal reforms. Obviously, you all would love to see reauthorization. That is no different from any actor in the space. We're clearly not done with this construction project of modernizing America. That's, I don't think, speaking out of turn or frankly, anything that the data doesn't indicate. But I am a fan of locals and regionals doing more, but we are hearing constantly in DC two interwoven conversations. And this is not necessarily an easy question, but I'd love a direct answer if you can. Number one is that implementation matters. We need these dollars to move. There are political overtones that doesn't matter who's in the White House, they would feel the same, but it's more about actually spending this money quickly so we can make the case to Congress, right? Second part is that we are hearing consistently about capacity constraints at the local level. How can we address both at once? And I'm trying to set up a leading question here, but I also would love to hear some honest reflections on, do localities have the staff they need? And what would be the ROI to make sure that maybe we could build up local capacity, which for folks who don't know, we have been starving local government in America for decades. And now some of those kind of the results of that are coming home a little bit. How do we build up local government again? And how do we make that case in Washington for its importance to actually delivering, as you said really well, Mayor, the results, right? Filling those potholes. I mean, this is actually everyday results for people. So again, staff capacity constraints, how bad is it? And what can we do about it?
Well, I'll start. And you know, when it comes to staff capacity, you know, I'm going to kind of speak through a little bit different lens, one that I know all too well. When you're looking at, you know, the smaller cities and really, by and large, it's the villages. You know, when I'm looking at villages that are neighbor villages to the city of Athens that have a population of 172 up in Amesville, Ohio, or Racine, Ohio, which is right on the river, which has a population of 600. Personnel capacity becomes a real issue. But again, to speak to partnering, you know, to partner together and to have faith in someone who would be the lead applicant on this and to bring those partners in, I think speaks volumes. Something else I want to share with you when it comes to the reauthorization that I think is extremely important, and this might sound cliche, it's not, that infrastructure is truly the down payment on future economies. It is. And something else to reflect on being, you know, if Congress were to snap back the funding to the previous funding levels, here's the deficit that we're going to see at the American family level. And it's to the tune of $1,300 annually that's going to be lost because of the economic development that we're going to be and are experiencing with a lot of what we're seeing with IIJA as well as IRA. On the capacity front, I think there's a role that larger cities, medium-sized cities can play in helping to foster relationships with the smaller communities to pull them in when they're doing these larger grant requests or multi-jurisdiction grant requests. But if there were any way in which there could be funding to help build out capacity in some of the smaller cities would be wonderful too. To use the direct funding to start supporting a grant writer, a financial administrator. You'd be surprised at how many villages don't have a financial administrator. They don't. And they certainly don't have a grant writer or a village planner. That's lacking. And so if there's a way in which we can draw that in to the process, would be a win-win for everybody at the end of the day. But again, I want you to keep that number in the back of your mind, $1,300 a year that our American families would be losing if this isn't reauthorized.
Could I push a tiny bit, but just to kind of hear you say it? In other words, the cost to apply for grants is real and labor costs, right? I mean, you both have mentioned it. So in other words, but the planning still needs to be done, even if those are state dollars flowing down to you all. So, I mean, these capacity constraints are not just about this federal law. These are just, we need help, period, at the local level. Is that fair?
That is fair. That'd be fair in Ohio, the Ohio Public Works Commission, for funding, a smaller bridge project or your wastewater treatment plant, your water treatment plant. And there's we're seeing villages too that really struggle and are challenged with applying for that type of funding and certainly at the federal level.
Same question to you.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because, we're now in year 3 of applying and at NACO. We have rural counties, same things. We've got counties in Texas that have 200 people. We have many counties in Florida that have 5,000 people, right? I think I have more than 5,000 people on my street in Miami-Dade County. So very different. You had a high level of confidence in the larger communities to just start applying. As a matter of fact, I think as Stephanie and I think Sam can attest to, we applied too soon and then all of a sudden the poor DOT had to go, it's got to be ready to be built now. Don't rush. There's going to be year 2 and year 3, get your projects ready to go. And we had a project pipeline and we had the capacity, to push this forward. But as I sat and chaired my committees with these rural counties, it was year 1 was deer in the headlights. Like they just stared at you. Because they are the grant writer. Sometimes they are the guy that picks up the garbage. I mean, our commissioners are, they're doing it all in these smaller places. What I used to say to them is watch somebody else, right? Because there are small counties and there are small cities, but there's all different levels, right? There's a 50,000 person and they do have the capacity to apply for this, right? It may be a stretch, but they can do it. Watch what they do and quite frankly, copy their grant application. And so we are seeing more and more rural communities of smaller cities be able to do a good job at that. The grant agreement process, as we all know, has been a little slow to sign. And I really don't, I know sometimes people complain about it, but when you look at how fast money, this implementation, like breaking ground, getting stuff going, when you look at what's happened at America's ports, that just is boom. Those grant agreements are done. Same thing, the airport, all the investments in airports. We haven't talked about the day, but phenomenal. Those grant agreements are done. Those projects are moving and, notice to proceed. But it's the same customers, right? DOTs always work, with these airports and they always work with these seaports. In their graciousness of allowing cities and counties to apply, not only do we have to struggle to get our capacity up, but they also are learning how to serve a larger group of customers. And quite frankly, they've done a really phenomenal job, right? Because they've gone from 52 to a bazillion of us with various levels of capacity. So thank you for doing that. And we have to be patient with them just as they have to be patient with us. There's been a lot of workforce development, not only, components, not only to the IIJA, but also through the EDA, where, for example, where I know commerce isn't here today, but a lot of the infrastructure workforce, in order to build these things, we have a capacity not just beyond writing and applying at local governments, but how do we actually get these things built? Do we have enough, tradesperson? Do we have enough engineers and scientists? So EDA is helping with that. But I was just thinking here, maybe we need to start a lobbying effort, you and I, about capacity building for local governments. Your boot camp is one approach, but really looking at how are we making sure that everybody can write a grant? It's actually just typing, right? I mean, at a basic level.
And these days with Chat GPT, you can sit there and
yeah. So there
write a grant.
So there is the
Checkbox AI for this conversation.
exactly. So
Fired him off.
But people need confidence in doing it. You read the federal government NOFOs and the typing is very small and you have to get your magnifying glass out and it's intimidating. It's intimidating big counties. So there's capacity constraints. I also think we're all learning. DOT has been so impressive as a learning organization to me because they have changed how they interact with us. And the technical, they have really focused so much on trying to make technical assistance available for these smaller spots. And it's funny, there was one grant that I think it's a thriving, does that sound right? Thriving communities. Thriving communities. And we had some not-for-profits in Miami-Dade County said, you got to apply. I'm like, if DOT is not going to award Miami-Dade County, we have an $11 billion budget. If we can't figure out our own technical capacity issues, we should be ashamed of our government. We have got to let the smaller communities apply for that. We can't take advantage of that. And so sometimes as larger spots, we just cannot ethically and responsibly apply for that because then DOT has to read the bloody thing to reject us. And we should be rejected on technical assistance if we know how to do it. We need to make sure technical assistance is going to the right size communities and right size counties.
I would love to ask you multiple more questions. You both know that I want to do that, but we don't have time to do that. So I want to quickly kind of summarize before we thank you all. Clearly, these dollars are hitting markets. They are across multiple different programs. If you are not up on acronyms when you walked in today or started the stream, you got hit with a couple of them. No, that's okay, because I actually think it speaks to the breadth of what's happening here. But to borrow something you kind of said, Mayor, which I think is great, is it's not just the physical capital that's a down payment. It's that there's also an opportunity to make a down payment on what local, county, and I think we'll hear in a few minutes, what regional governments can deliver. And that's something we shouldn't miss here. That's actually unusual in federal policy because when you become a good grant writer on infrastructure, chances are you'll probably be a good grant writer for other opportunities too. So this is not going away as a lesson of how do we build better collaborative spirit, which both of you mentioned. I love hearing that. I didn't even push you to do it. But also what's that collaborative spirit, particularly on human capital from the federal, state, and local. So join me in thanking the mayor and the commissioner for spending time with us today. I have the really, really great pleasure to introduce Samantha Silverberg. Her title is Person You Want to Know in the White House on Infrastructure. She is truly fantastic. And we are lucky, truly, as a country and as communities to have her in that seat. So, Samantha, the floor is yours.
Well, I can spend my entire allotted time just responding to what I heard, but I will stick to my prepared remarks. First, just thanking NLC, NACO, Brookings, United for Infrastructure, everyone else. I want to acknowledge a couple folks. Does Justin step out? Bummer. I'll save it for the end. But our amazing data people are here. And so for everyone in the room and on the stream who utilizes our data, we have two of those rock stars here. So I'll acknowledge Justin and Drew at the end. And so as Adi said, I work at the White House. My real title is Deputy Assistant to the President for Infrastructure Implementation. What that means is that I lead the work across all federal departments and agencies, as well as White House teams to implement the president's transformational bipartisan infrastructure law. I see a lot of friends in the room, so you may know this, but for those who don't, before I joined the administration, I worked at the MBTA, the transit agency in Boston. So what's happening? So I know there is no one like local officials who know how to get things done. And will also share their perspective and feedback about how to get things done better. And I've had the great pleasure of speaking with Commissioner Higgins recently. Mayor Pattison, we had not met previously, but I'm so happy to hear everything that you had to say, and I hope that we can speak more after this. So, let me just start with the big picture, right? President Biden has a vision for this country. Rebuild our infrastructure, boost American manufacturing, restore the country's competitiveness, and tackle the climate crisis. Doing all of this while creating good paying jobs and growing our economy from the middle out and the bottom up. And that vision is realized through what we call the Investing in America agenda. So that started with the American Rescue Plan in the early days of the administration, then the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. We are thinking about both the what and the how. The what, that's the $1 trillion plus investment in our infrastructure, roads, bridges, transit, rail, ports, airports, water systems, broadband, clean energy, you name it. But the how is just as important, right? Doing this work, centering that we are have equity in mind. We are leaving no community behind. We're creating good paying jobs, union jobs where possible. We are making products in America, and we're collaborating closely with all of our partners at the state and local level because we know we cannot do this alone. So here we are, Infrastructure Week again. And we are excited to be with you to highlight how the president is delivering. And so Infrastructure Week, as you know, was an empty punchline in the previous administration. But we like to say that the president is now delivering an infrastructure decade that will benefit communities for generations to come. We are 2.5 years in to implementation, which is kind of remarkable when you think about that. We are breaking ground and cutting the ribbon all across the country. So we've announced over 56,000 projects all across the country, across all of our states, DC, territories, and in tribal communities. And I'll give you a few top lines of kind of how that demonstrates itself in specific areas. So we've started, and in some cases completed improvements on over 165,000 miles of roads. Those are major interstate highways, but also county roads, state roads, rural roads, and others. Launched over 9,400 bridge projects, again, both large and small bridges. As folks in this audience know, we made a concerted effort to focus on off-system bridges as some of those that need the most help. We've launched over 1,400 water projects, drinking water and wastewater, and deployed funding that will help replace over 1.7 million lead service lines. The president believes strongly that no one should have to worry about turning on their tap and drinking dirty water, and this has been a huge priority of the administration. On internet, and my internet pro, Jordan Arnold, is here. We've enabled more than 23 million low-income households to access free or discounted high-speed internet service through the Affordable Connectivity Program, which Congress needs to keep funding, by the way, and we've called on them many times to do that. And we've also provided funding to more than 280 tribal governments to connect over 65,000 homes to high-speed internet. We are announcing new awards, but also we are breaking ground and cutting ribbons on projects both big and small. So I know lots of folks have been paying attention to the fact that the Brightline West high-speed rail project out west broke ground just last month. That is a huge accomplishment, and we're watching that eagerly. Also, the Hudson River Tunnel between New York and New Jersey, another project that was long delayed by the previous administration, is underway and will have a huge impact on the region. Also, we have major projects in other categories besides transportation. So the Lewis and Clark rural water system is building over 300 miles of water pipeline to support 350,000 people in Minnesota, South Dakota, and Iowa. And that project has been accelerated by a decade, thanks to over $100 million of funding from the infrastructure law. And so when we talk about Bill, when we talk about local governments, we want to make sure that we're highlighting some of the key opportunities that county governments, local governments, regional governments have within this enormous piece of legislation. So on transportation, the previous panelists gave me a good intro into what I wanted to highlight, which was safe streets and roads for all. You know, local leaders know more than anyone that safe streets, strong public transportation are critical to having a healthy and vibrant community. So Safe Streets and Roads for All, a dedicated $5 billion program that funds directly to local governments Already, we've provided over $1.7 billion in funding to over 1,000 communities in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. That funding will improve roadway safety for about 70% of the nation's population. And we're only just a couple of years into that program. So that's pretty remarkable. And we're excited to see what comes out of that. In Detroit, for example, a $25 million investment will improve safety and bus stop accessibility at 56 high crash intersections. And that program, the notice of funding opportunity, is actually still open. Tomorrow's the deadline for implementation grants, but August 29th is the deadline for planning and demonstration grants. Local governments also love RAISE, formerly known as BUILD, formerly known as TIGER, right? Big increases in funding for that program as well. And this is a program where I know many localities are eagerly awaiting decisions that will be coming very soon, but also the next opportunity will open in the fall. And so just reminding everyone that, this is a 5-year bill. Nearly all of the programs have funding spread out over those 5 years. So we still have 2 years of funding, if not more, available for all of these programs. So if you haven't been able to benefit yet, don't count yourselves out. I think that's one of the key messages I want to be able to communicate, particularly on the transportation side. The infrastructure law also invests over $50 billion in water, which is the largest investment in clean water in U.S. history. So through EPA state revolving funds, already $25 billion has already been delivered to states to be distributed through water systems at the local level. Just 2 weeks ago, the president was in Wilmington, North Carolina, announcing the next $3 billion for lead service line improvements. And I encourage localities to continue to work with your water systems and utilities to identify projects and apply for funding. Every year, we push all of the states towards the end of the year to make sure that they are putting that money on local projects. There is often money left over. So again, continue to push from the local level, bubble those projects up, be persistent. I know you all know how, because this is critically important to deliver clean water, replace lead pipes, address forever chemicals like PFAS, and secure wastewater and sanitation services. Just yesterday, I sat on a panel with Mayor Josh Pettis of Osseo, Wisconsin, right? A town of 1,800 people. And he told a really compelling story about how his community was able to access resources from the bipartisan infrastructure law to build a new wastewater treatment facility. And had they not been able to access, in this case, it was USDA loans and grants for rural water infrastructure, he would have had to increase rates on his community quite significantly. So, you think about the ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers report, and some of the stats about savings, this is meaningful, it is real, and we want to continue to keep that momentum up. And then, of course, on high-speed internet, the infrastructure law directs $65 billion to ensure that everyone in America can access affordable, reliable, high-speed internet. The centerpiece of that program is the BEAD program, which is allocated more than $50 billion to every state and territory. Most states are now in the middle of something called their challenge process, which is an opportunity for local governments and internet companies to weigh in on the state plans to make sure that they truly are connecting every possible location. And so if you haven't been in touch with your state broadband office, and your community has an interest here, please do know that this is the time to weigh in, because we wouldn't want this generational investment to pass you by. And then the last area I'll highlight with particular local interest is resilience. The infrastructure law included about $50 billion to help communities improve resilience to all hazards, floods, fires, storms, drought, cybersecurity, and more. A couple of the ways that we're doing that are through FEMA's BRIC program, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. It's a $5 billion program, both BRIC and FMA, flood mitigation assistance, funding a range of resilience programs. In Philly, FEMA awarded $50 million to replace their pollution control plant, which had overtopped 62 times due to heavy rains in the last 5 years. More funding for those programs will be available later this summer. And FEMA has really excellent technical assistance resources. So encourage folks to check that out. So again, the message I really want to communicate to you all is twofold. One is that we have made incredible progress, mostly thanks to wonderful partnership for folks like you, 56,000 projects, $450 billion out the door, but there's still more to come. So, we want everyone to get in the game. We are truly committed to, when the president says we are leaving no community behind. And so we know that that requires collaboration and engagement. So now that I've given you your homework, let me tell you a little bit about what the administration is doing to make sure that funding is accessible to all communities. So it is a priority. It has been a priority since the early days when we were talking with folks like Adi about what are our risks to make sure that there is that local capacity, there is that ability that the communities that need this investment the most are best able to access it. And so we worked with we work with governors to appoint state infrastructure coordinators who at the state level are our interface. We've created guidebooks and playbooks, and we've stood up technical assistance programs across essentially every department and agency that has resources within this law. So Commissioner Higgins mentioned thriving communities. So DOT's Thriving Communities program pairs under-resourced and disadvantaged communities with capacity builders who are funded by the program to help develop and deliver these kind of projects. The first cohort of communities that participated in Thriving Communities saw an increase of about 50% in their chance of winning DOT awards. And so the program is working, and there is more to come there. On the water side, EPA has committed to invest a total of $500 million, including funds from Bill, to partner with 1,500 disadvantaged communities and help them access funding for water infrastructure. This includes their Get the Lead Out partnership, which is partnering with 200 underserved communities to help them replace lead pipes. And then on FEMA, they also have a direct technical assistance program where FEMA is working directly with communities that are trying to access funds for resilience. One recipient of that support is a community called Depew, Illinois, which successfully secured about $23 million to relocate their wastewater treatment plant outside of floodplain. And we're not stopping there. We are going to continue to push this. Commissioner Higgins mentioned, we are a learning organization. We want to hear what's working, what's not working, how we can be better, how we can be better partners. So before I conclude, now I'm going to do my shout out. So Justin Cole and Drew Keller, can you guys stand up, are two of the unbelievable data folks that we have on the team and the folks behind all of the invest.gov data. So sorry for embarrassing you. Just to, in conclusion, I think you can tell the president is delivering for the American people through this Investing in America agenda. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, the American Rescue Plan. It's all about this vision of growing the economy from the middle out and the bottom up, boosting manufacturing, creating good paying jobs, tackling the climate crisis, and leaving no community behind. Our agenda has created 15 million jobs, construction jobs that are at an all-time high. We've created almost 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. And to showcase all of this progress, Adi gave us a great shout out for invest.gov. So please do visit invest.gov. Which provides information on where both our public sector awards are going, but also where complementary private sector awards are happening. We've spurred over $860 billion in private sector awards and everything from semiconductors, EV batteries, to biotech and advanced manufacturing, and more is to come. So again, I'll just say with 56,000 projects, Infrastructure Week is a punchline no more. And so just huge thanks for the opportunity to address you all, and look forward to continuing to work together. Thank you.
On again. There we go. You get more of me. A huge thanks to Sam for making the time. It is a extremely busy week for the White House and the rest of the agencies who get, you wouldn't imagine how many requests on their time to speak at these events. So we really appreciate Sam and her White House colleagues too for being in the room today. We're now going to turn to kind of a more regionally oriented conversation. One bit of housekeeping before I get started. This conversation's so good that we're going long. So I just want to give you all a heads up. Our amazing colleagues at NLC and NACO in particular, whoever technically has a book, let's say it's joint. We have it's NACO. Sorry, Brittany. Huge thanks to Brittany and Jessica. You're not hearing from today. They are amazing in general. If you don't know them, you're doing it wrong. But in general, they've made this event possible in terms of the actual space here today. We actually have it reserved if folks need to leave, please stay to hear folks, but we understand it's not rude. We get it. And a conversation that's going long in DC means it's a good conversation, right? And so we appreciate it. And if you need to get up, I know folks that already have found the restrooms and things, but there's still more food, I think, out there. So I'm saying if you need to get a refreshment, go get it. These folks want you to be comfortable as you listen to them too. So don't hesitate. With that out of the way, like I said, and I really liked Bill's joke, a room where we don't need to introduce what MPO stands for. We're at the MPO, but do you know what COG means? We're at that stage of the conversation too. And look, I said this a bit in my intro, and we're going to give a chance to both these great gentlemen and these leaders to introduce not just themselves, but the regions they represent. But these are the, and again, I work for the Brookings Metro program, so to put my biases on the table here a little bit, these are the actual units of economic geography that represent not just the future of America, it's really the future of the world. You know, these concepts of municipal boundaries are where our economies just stop and you live and work and play and do all your other essential activities in one like technical legal place. That's an old idea. We have quite literally outgrown those boundaries. And we've known this for many decades here in the country. The federal government has been, I think it's fair to say, wrestling with what do you do with that? States have been wrestling with what do you do with that? But at the same time, we have been building up both the legal and governance infrastructure to respond. And that what I think is so fascinating is that this is one of the most dynamic governance conversations that we will have as a country for decades to come. Those municipal borders aren't going anywhere, but we're not going to return to living and working and playing in one place either. So we've got to figure out how to govern and invest in our regions. And both of these folks that we have here today represent really important places. So I'm going to do very short introductions because the first question is to allow them to introduce themselves. So William Murdoch is the executive director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, or MORPC, right? Which is really fun to say, actually. Undersold. And then Andrew Vermeer is the executive director of the MTC in the San Francisco Bay Area. And what I think is important to note here, and part of how they most likely got these jobs, is they didn't just all of a sudden just land on this. They have decades of experience working at the local level, in some cases the state level. They understand how government works and how economies work. And so it is really important to understand their background to deliver on really complex problems, actually, that make our communities better to live in. So let me kind of open with this, right? What I'd love you each to do is kind of twofold. And Andrew, maybe I'll start with you because I'm going to go to you, William, on the second question, is to introduce your region. Tell these people, like, first of all, how big's your board? You can talk about that because that's a nightmare to some folks to think about. How many municipalities are in it, how many counties, how big the land area is, how's the population, any of those items you want to hit, introduce these regions, right? Because it's not just San Francisco City or even Oakland or Columbus, right? It's the entire place. And then from there, how have you all, as the same way the mayor and the councilor also kind of spoke to, is what how you're feeling the IIJA in your regions, right? How has this kind of changed the game, if you will, for what you do? So Andrew, let's start with you.
Okay, there we go. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, Andrew Vermeer, I'm the executive director at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is the MPO, but we're also the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is the Council of Governments. The San Francisco Bay Area is home to about 7.5 million people. The fun fact is each of the 9 counties touch the Bay at one point or another. And we've got 101 cities. We are also blessed with 27 different transit operators, 6 different toll operators. So governance in the Bay Area is a challenge, and trying to get consensus and deliver in a timely manner is one of our big challenges for sure. We have actually one staff that reports to both boards. So I have a complicated answer to your question, and that is I have 35 members of my COG. I have about 19 members on my MPO. We have also created several JPAs between multiple agencies that we also manage under the same commission structure.
JPA is?
I'm sorry, a joint, what is it? Hey, somebody help me out here.
I'd let you get away with a federal program acronym, but not.
No,
that.
no, it's actually just a really, it's a joint venture basically between two agencies. And so we are also the Bay Area Toll Authority. And as the Bay Area Toll Authority, we manage the 7 state-owned toll bridges in the San Francisco Bay, which really have a monopoly on how you transport both the economy and recreation. And in that structure, the Bay Area Toll Authority has certain authorities, including bonding authority, where the MPO, MTC has certain authorities. And by putting them together, we create other strengths and protections. So we are also the Bay Area Housing Financing Authority, the Bay Area Infrastructure Financing Authority, and we go on from there. But our biggest challenge really is recognizing that the state of California requires our regional transportation and housing plans to be married together. The two of them combined create the responsibility to have a plan that both deals with greenhouse gas reductions, but also tries to make sure that we have a thriving economy with affordable housing for all. And that's where the big challenge is. So since 2017, the one staff has managed both programs. And in that, we have really learned how to create sort of one voice for the region to understand what government is challenged with in delivering on the plan's goals. So for instance, this November, we will be putting together a ballot initiative to create $20 billion for affordable housing. We're going to follow that in 2026 by a transportation measure that's designed really to deal with the end of the federal relief money because we recognize that supporting transit operations is something that is currently not funded. So our challenges absolutely are in delivering on thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of new affordable housing units in the next decade, as well as trying to find a recovery method for a really robust but struggling transit system. I'm sure you're all familiar. We've had a real challenge getting our ridership back. We're still well below 50% across the region. Our work from home numbers are over the top, and it's really sort of changed the dynamics of the San Francisco Bay region, and we're trying to react to that. So that's our big introduction.
That's great, Andrew. Again, same question for you, William. Yeah, introduce Columbus and how you all are feeling the IIJA so far.
Thanks, Adi. And oftentimes we say that we believe in public service, we believe in local government. So to be here with NLC and NACO and AMPO and the National Association of Regional Councils, this is really exciting. So I'm William Murdoch with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. We do say that our friends can call us MORPC because it's fun to say, so you all can call us that. Let me tell you about Columbus, Ohio, and our region. So we are one of the fastest growing regions in the country. Right now, we've got about 2.4 million people. We expect to add about another 750,000 over the next 2 decades. That's fast growth. It's not as fast as some places, but it is pretty significant, especially in the Midwest. And therein lies our outlook and our challenge and our opportunity. When you think about the region, if you don't know it, we're in the heart of Ohio. We are a major hub for mobility, technology, research. We have Ohio State, which is one of the largest research universities in the country. Battelle, which is the largest nonprofit research institution in the country. Honda's global North American headquarters. We have Cardinal Health. And we have this major investment that many of you may have heard about called Intel, building the largest semiconductor factory in the United States. I could go on, you know I could, but there's a lot of energy and a lot of momentum in our region. And when we think about this moment in time and things like the IIJA, we see the opportunity, but we are, and I'm very proud of our communities and how we've responded to this. We're very grounded in the fact that not everybody in our region's benefiting from this prosperity and this growth. So whether it's looking at Justice 40 communities or looking at how we can bridge that economic divide, whether it's rural or urban, we're trying to make sure that we grow better as we grow bigger. And IIJA has been an important tool for that. Why a regional council? So we have great examples all over the country. In Ohio, we've got a lot of them. What MORPC does is we bring local governments of all types together across our region. Almost 90 local governments. You asked that question, a board of almost 170 local officials. Remember, I said we believe in local government. We love local government because they're all on our board. What we do is we help them collaborate on transportation. We're a metropolitan planning organization. We're also a rural transportation planning organization. We're one of the nation's newest economic development districts. So we're helping them cross the divide on economic development. We are a policy council. We're a sustainability umbrella and work on everything from air and water to trails. And we help implement housing solutions and weatherizations. So why all those things? It's because those are the areas that don't stop at city boundaries or county boundaries. We function as an economic unit, as you mentioned, Dottie. Air quality doesn't stop at borders, economic and transportation options. We have to think regionally. And so that's what our organization is focused on. And maybe just, we want to talk about the IIJA, I know. There are three things that dovetail into what we're excited about right now and how we're responding to growth. One has to do with passenger rail. You mentioned Ohio. Columbus is the largest region in the country that's not on the nation's passenger rail network. And why would you have a regional council involved? Because we can bring those partners together, bring the states together to help solve this. IIJA, through the Corridor ID program, has allowed us to qualify 2 routes through Columbus to help solve this problem. And it's not just about Columbus, it's about our rural communities getting access, major areas. It's about Appalachian Ohio having access. We've been focused on safety. We mentioned Safe Streets for All. This has taken our plans and our ideas and really amplified them, both in rural villages, in Appalachian areas of our region, but also in the city of Columbus and some of our major suburbs. This program has been transformative, whether it's planning, implementation, or even these trial opportunities that we can do. And I guess the third thing I'd mention is when it comes to reconnecting communities. The commissioner talked about this earlier. We are a large region and we don't have what we'll call advanced mass transit. And this fall, it's going to be a busy fall for us. We too are, as a region, are going to the ballot to bring real bus rapid transit, hundreds of miles of trails and sidewalks, and a significant increase in the quality and the dignity and the service that we provide in transit. And reconnecting communities has given us that jump start because one of the poorest communities that is disconnected from our job centers, we just recently received a $41 million Reconnecting Communities grant to jumpstart that project ahead of things. And we are so excited about it because this is about opportunity, but in a growing region too, we need people to fill those jobs. And a lot of those folks are right in our own community.
Yeah, great. I'm so glad you all got a chance to introduce yourselves. You saw in the last panel too. Now is when I kind of come for this is now we're going to ask real questions. But both of these, I mean, you can kind of see where my priors are here, right? And I think a lot of folks probably in the room and probably streaming, right? So you all have to deal with tough challenges each day. I want to start with you, William, on one, and then Andrew, I'll come to you on something kind of you talked about in relating both housing and climate to both state and local needs. But to start with you, William, you mentioned Intel. I'm so glad you already introduced it, right? One of truly the largest federal investments, but also one of the largest corporate investments. It's conveniently happening right outside the municipal borders of Columbus, but that's still in your neck of the woods. And you mentioned being an EDD. Talk about how it comes to ground as a challenge for you, your board, your member communities, right? In the end of the day, to stitch together these disparate, in the end of the day, federal packages, right? You've got one that's a complete, I mean, this, right? We're now talking, just to be clear, everyone, that's chips and science. We're not even talking about the IRA here. So chips and science money funnels to one place. You've got your hands on some IIJA money, but in many ways that's consistent spending. How do you all have to serve as that forum to manage what, if folks don't see the geography in their head, like some of us do? I mean, there are some transportation problems here. This is not rebuilding where things already, or investing where assets already are. It's actually kind of moving on the border a little bit. But you've got to deal with that, right? And of course, you want the jobs, you want the tech capacity. Yeah, give us a little bit of a window of what you're free to say of what those conversations are like and how you plan the investments around them.
I really appreciate the question. And of course, I want to start with we as a region, as a state, are really grateful to Intel, to the state leaders, to the regional leaders, to the local leaders who helped make this possible. This is a transformative investment. Even in a large region like Columbus, the size of this investment is enormously impactful and will be for a generation, not to mention the national security implications and all of those other things too. So when it was announced, I think it hit our region like a shockwave. And What I mean by that is we had two things happening. We had a lot of local governments who are already stretched to capacity saying, who can help us with this? What are the impacts of this beyond just that one site? And then we had a good number of folks in the region who said, well, that's all the way over there in the corner. And, why should we be really excited or worried or planning for this? And many of them, because of our relationships, look to us as regional council to help them understand it. And one of the first things we did, and Adi, it sounds a little corny, but stay with me here, is we made a map. We made a map to tell a story. And it sounds silly, but when you make that map and we showed them the drive times from this site throughout our region, it became really clear that this wasn't just one site or one community. It was the entire region. We did it in 20, 40, 60-minute commute increments. Why? When you talk to Intel and we say, well, where are your employers and where will your suppliers be located? Well, 20, 40, 60 minutes from the site. And very quickly, it energized and frankly concerned and excited everybody that this is something that's going to impact housing, transportation, the environment, economic development, and we have to think and work together as a region. So as the MPO, as the RTPO, this has been transformative. We've been able to move very quickly, again, thanks to some of the federal investments, not just CHIPS, to do things we haven't done before, like collaborate where urban and rural transit meet to serve the site. So we've been developing plans on that to move really quickly on the highway infrastructure and roads and bridges to serve the site and beyond. We've been able to extend our efforts with economic development, looking at working with our workforce partners, looking at regional housing impacts. And as a regional entity, again, this is something local governments look to us for, which is what's the regional housing situation? What do we need to do? How can we navigate this? Not perfect. These are tense discussions, but we've been able to help serve as a forum for those things. And maybe the last thing is we serve as a sustainability group. The Intel project has spurred us for the first time to do a regional water study. And what do I mean by that? Well, Ohio, we've got a county and a city, and we've got all of these folks providing water and looking for resources, and we haven't been comprehensively planning. Intel taught us that we need to do that now. So we have kicked off a study with our state partners to look at supply, demand, innovation for the whole region. And it's pretty exciting. It's a lot of work for us, but it's pretty exciting.
It's work anyone would take, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. We'll stay on the tech beat in some ways, right? Going to Silicon Valley, broadly defined. Many of us in the room, I'm assuming, but I mean as a compliment to folks who are here, we know what blueprint means in California. We may even know SB blank 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 numbers. There's clearly this tension in California. Where do you find affordable housing? How do you actually get VMT to get lower? How do you change behavior? We want healthy downtowns, but when folks don't commute to work, they may have a lower VMT footprint. How are you all at NTC seen as a convening point to grapple with those conversations? And if you don't mind me asking, where is the state in some ways putting pressure on you, but you don't actually control some of these levers, right? So you actually have to work with your localities to kind of help them. Frankly, I think maybe it's education or whatever it might be, serving just as a form to collaborate. But how do you have to help filter those messages down so we actually change land use behavior on the ground?
Yeah, that's a challenging question for sure. Well, let me start first with our regional transportation and housing plans, very similar to what you all do around the nation. That really is what we call our North Star, and it defines what our goals are and how we're going to achieve them. And that, I think, is very definitive by itself. The challenge, as you mentioned, is how do you get folks together to really kind of get to that point? And that's where things really get rough. San Francisco has always sort of felt like it was the center of the region and has always been the historical focal point. But as we all know, historically speaking, San Francisco is boom and bust since the gold rush of the 1850s. And it's in another cycle. I will assure you, though, it's still a beautiful place to come visit. So please come. But they're sort of adjusting to a new role as they look to the south and see San Jose, which is now one of the 12, I think it's the 12th largest city in the nation, and the biggest city in the region. And they really feel like they deserve a lot of attention and would like to see the center of the Bay sort of work its way south, which creates attention for counties in between, like San Mateo, that actually run the commuter rail that goes up and down the coast, or up and down the 101 corridor. Our housing challenges are no different than a lot of places. They're just sort of exaggerated. And so most of the affordable housing is either in the northern and eastern part of our region, or frankly out in the Central Valley. And folks are still having to come in really to turn on the lights and keep buildings operating. You know, the tech community, the white collar community has found a workaround to coming into the office every day, but the investment in the infrastructure has not changed. And so we still see very significant congestion during all parts of the day. The patterns have changed a lot. We've also identified some real challenges on local transportation, as a lot of discretionary travel is now sort of interior in the smaller cities, and the impact on the arterial system has been incredibly dramatic. MTC, Metropolitan Transportation Commission, for many cycles of the plan has invested most of our revenue in transit development. So we actually have a very well-defined and aging transit and transportation infrastructure. We have not been focusing on highway capacity development for a long time. And so that sort of adds to the challenge because we don't have a complete system yet. One of our first investments that has been working on for 20 or 30 years is completing the BART system, which is our heavy rail commuter system. So we have a large project going down into San Jose that is struggling, as many mega projects do. Prices are going astronomically high. It's becoming to get to the point where we're still re-asking the questions of whether it's the right investment. We have an extension of the train into downtown San Francisco that's intended to be ready for high-speed rail many decades from now when it arrives into the Bay.
Get your honesty on that.
And, you know, we have an awful lot of interest in continued expansion of rail systems that are very difficult to afford, both in a capital and an operating sense. And that really starts to lay out one of the big challenges is how do you satisfy all of those desires? And I use the word desire over need very particularly because it's really making us focus on what do we need versus what do we desire. We have also, for many decades, invested in incentivizing developing housing in transit-oriented arenas. So our policy used to be called the Transit-Oriented Development Policy. Now it's Transit-Oriented Communities Policy. And it really is putting restrictions on your ability to spend federal and state transportation money on investments that don't really connect well with dense, affordable housing. And so that's been a stick or a carrot that we try to use to really change the behavior of how development happens in the region so that we aren't requiring people to get back into the car to get to work and get to their recreation. And we have seen some incredible progress in that direction. So we do believe that the incentives have worked, and we continue to look forward as we go forward to make sure that any investment in the transportation system is also designed to connect to housing. And then that also allows us to spend a lot of energy in sort of the space that was talked about in the first panel around safe streets and the first last mile connections. So as the Bay Area Regional Authority, we also run the Regional Bike Share Program. We're very much focused on the mobility wallet concepts. We run the Clipper program, which is like the TAP program out here. And then we also have Fast Track, which is the toll system. And our desire in the long run is to connect the three to try to incentivize folks to get out of their cars into transit that is safe, clean, reliable, and then have an opportunity to get that first last mile connection done. So I think I've danced around sort of all the challenges. How we get together is really trying to find venues that think broadly about those policies. We have a lot of organizational effort at bringing the public works folks, the transportation folks, as well as the transit operators to the table to really try to get consensus on how you manage in that space. The state has added quite a bit of challenge to us, though. The the state decisions really give us no credit. As you probably know, California has had an incredible conversion to the electric vehicles. Our, rate of change has been astronomical. But our regional transportation and housing plan does not get credit for the electrification of the fleet. And so we're now forced with looking at solutions that are going to probably embed pricing on all lanes in congested corridors that have good transit to, again, try to find good solutions, equitable solutions that provide benefits to the public, but also incentivize them to get out of their cars, really at odds with what the state is imposing on us in terms of a responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if folks, we do quite a bit of work in San Diego, and I'm not sure if folks are fully aware of how vibrant this governance set of debates is happening on the ground there. I think we just get word of what passes the legislature in Sacramento, right? And folks don't understand how to implement. I know we're relatively tight on time, and I want to make sure that Eric can come to stage to help wrap us up. So let me wrap up the panel with something related to federal reforms. We've kind of stayed away from it. And I don't mean this to be to put you all on the spot. This is actually as much with your AMPO and NARC hats, if you will, as just your personal hats. We saw a huge sea change in 1991 through the late great Senator Moynihan to help kind of the federal infrastructure, governance infrastructure, recognize metropolitan planning organizations in particular, especially in transportation. We've seen other growth over time, but there's also going to be a big opportunity here, as we've heard both from Samantha and the prior panel on you learn a lot when you pass big bills. But I think there's also a clear case, as actually the mayor made, that we need to keep investing too. So if that helps keep the temperature up on capital investments, what can we also think about on ways to incentivize more regional collaboration out of Washington? So floor is kind of yours. What are kind of maybe top 1 or 2 items that you would love to see that would actually make your life easier on the ground, right? To not just implement your vision, but honestly, to put these federal dollars to work quicker and with bigger impact, which I think is frankly what the legislators here in town want to see happen. So maybe William, we'll start with you and we'll close out on that.
Sure. And thanks again for the conversation. These dollars have been transformative. So we are grateful in the region. I think we're grateful as regional councils across the country. They're hitting all the key things that we need to work on: climate, economic security, transportation, like the mayor said, investing in our economic future. Ways to make it better. I mean, you said 1 or 2 things. I'm going to give you 3 really quick. So first, keeping that local component of direct funding to cities, counties, and regions. That's really the entities around the country that can really respond to the needs of the region. Those are entities that have to work across partisan divides to get stuff done. Just to be frank about it, pursuing that or preserving that is really important. We also think working just on reauthorization and thinking of advanced appropriations. This is really critical because infrastructure takes time. Infrastructure is complicated. You need predictability. And if you don't have those things, you have start-stop projects or you have communities who just don't do it. And that's where you get underinvestment. And I guess maybe the last thing, in addition to capacity at the staff level, which would be great, is there's so much competition and match that's required with all of these different grants. They're wonderful priorities. We wholeheartedly endorse them all, but it's getting frantic out there to be able to bring these dollars down for real needs. And one simple solution is just go to formula funding. I think there's a middle ground here where if you still have these priorities, instead of making regions scramble to raise match, $10,000 at a time from 80 communities, instead of competing, putting all the effort in that and then not getting the benefit of it, you've spent all this time on competing for something and not solving the problem. Think about ways to use formula funding to allow regions and cities and counties just to get started. And a great example of this, just to close, is the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant had these planning grants. Every major region got $1 million, every metropolitan just to get started. Instead of competing, instead of calling everybody, trying to raise match, we could just get started. And the impact of that was tremendous. And I know that's an EPA grant, but as you're thinking about DOT grants or these other things, think across silos, DOT, Commerce, EDA. There's ways to do this to still get these priorities done in a way that doesn't tax the capacity of local governments and regional councils. So that's my three.
I love that one. And the partnership, before I go to Andrew, the partnership for sustainable communities, just an example of these have legs too, right? Those plans can last for a decade. Planning can be corny, but the nice thing is once you do it, and if you do it well, you actually have it on the books for a while. And I think you've spoken about that too today. So same question to you. Yeah, what would make your life easier coming out of Federal Washington?
Look, I really appreciate William's answer. I got similar notes from sort of the preparation of the discussion. First of all, we have a great thank you out to the efforts that came out of Washington in the last few years. They've been put to work, and we're very proud of the results. The projects that have gotten either momentum because of that investment or were able to be completed have been exceptional. And it's our first word out of here when we come to Washington is thank you. Secondarily, I want to agree that even though our regions are very different, I think from the two descriptions, having some certainty from the federal government on how money is going to come out. And I know that's a challenge as administrations change. There's a desire to change, but that certainty is how you do get these long-term projects done. Our housing development plans take decades. We've been working on just getting support to put a housing bond on the measure for probably 15 years, and that hasn't built a house. So, that consistency and simplification of the formula funds would be fantastic. I do think that there's places for trying to eliminate a lot of the local match that does stress small communities to be able to participate. On the other hand, I think competition's good. So I think when we're looking for big capital investments, it is important for regions to get together and figure out their priorities and figure out how to support these projects very clearly. I think the last thing I would mention is sort of this real impact of the climate change. So as I mentioned, our 9 Bay Area counties all touch the Bay. The Bay is anticipated to rise several feet. All of our infrastructure investment, including housing, has been built on the lower sort of baylands, and it's also one of the most environmentally sensitive areas. We recently completed a study with some of our regional partners in the Bay, and we need to invest about $100 billion or more in protecting the region from climate change. That requires a new way of thinking about how you invest in multiple funding pots, because the resiliency money, the work that's done for restoration comes from very different areas. We are working very closely with our resource agencies to create partnerships that are unique to things that we've done in the past. We're really mimicking something actually that was done down in the North Coast corridors in San Diego, where they're investing in the Highway 5 corridor along the coast. And we're taking some of those ideas that were legislated for them and voluntarily applying them in the North region, where we've got a real housing workforce imbalance. We've got significant climate changes, high environmental resiliency concerns, and a series of partnerships that go beyond sort of even our normal reach of people that really want to do developments. And so looking at broad programs to deliver on a broad set of improvements, I think is one of the things that we would like to see out of Washington, support those efforts.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And financing resilience is going to be a big conversation coming forward. We are already, as you all know, a little bit past time. I want to both thank you all for staying, and then I would love you all to join me in thanking the panelists for joining us. I'll close this out. Thank you. You don't have to hear from me anymore.
Well, it's of course an honor to close out such an excellent event today. My name is Eric Zimmerman. I'm Executive Director of the National Association of Regional Councils. As our speakers today have demonstrated, cities, counties, and regions are meeting the transformational moment that the IIJA promises. Federal funding provided to the local level, both directly and through regions, is resulting in projects that improve safety, promote equity, reduce climate pollution, and create strong and resilient communities. Together, the organizations represented on the stage today will continue to tell the important stories of successful local and regional implementation. One of the things I find striking just from today's conversation is the really personal nature that those stories take on, whether it's getting kids to school safely in Athens, or it's fixing a divided community in Miami-Dade, or it's helping citizens reach new economic opportunities in the Columbus region, or it's providing housing to folks in the San Francisco region. Those are really personal stories that we have to tell about the success of this legislation and the important role that regions and local governments are playing in that implementation. So we're also confident that with all that we know that has been accomplished, that there's even more that cities and counties and regions can do. So our job is to continue to identify some of those opportunities for the upcoming reauthorization to further expand the funding for an authority of local governments and regional organizations. And that doing so really will support the ongoing success of the important efforts started by the IIJA. Changes to existing programs could ensure even broader local and regional access to funds, provide additional technical and other assistance, as was talked about today and is so important, and authorize additional funding for programs that are local and regionally focused to expand their scope and impact. So let me close out today first with a big thanks to Commissioner Eileen Higgins and Mayor Steve Patterson for their great panel on the role of local governments, to William and Murdoch and Andy Freimer for their thoughtful discussion on the important role of regions, to Samantha Silverberg from the White House, and to Adit Tomer from Brookings, our moderator extraordinaire. Thank you so much to all of you in the room and for everybody online for joining us today. And we sure hope you enjoy the rest of your infrastructure week. Thank you so much.
Oh, cool. Yeah.